She became the front runner for the Democratic nomination after President Joe Biden bowed to pressure from within the party and dropped out of the race in July. Swiftly, she won the support of the party heavyweights and was the only candidate to qualify for the Democratic presidential ballot, which ensured the outcome of the delegate voting was never in doubt. The 60-year-old is a former U.S. Senator and California Attorney General.
This channel not only feed your eyes with good movies, we also bring you the hottest and the newest trend around the globe. My darlings, sit tight and enjoy this one.
And with that, the clock begins to tick as we begin our official countdown to the U.S. elections and to who becomes the 47th president of the United States. A warm welcome to our special coverage of the U.S. elections. Beginning today, I am Amarachi Ubani. Here are your headlines. The campaign for presidential candidates Donald Trump and Kamala Harris as they both rally in the United States in the state of Nevada. We'll also be going back in times where it all began for both candidates. You'll see pictures of Trump and Harris as young as 3 years old. This will be the last Friday before Election Day in the United States. And we have seen the final week of intense campaigns for both presidential candidates. On Thursday, they're both focused on Hispanic voters. A look at Reuters' poll conducted this month showed Harris gaining the lead on Trump with 50% of the polls and Trump gaining just 38% compared with Democratic President Joe Biden's 54% in October 2020. So here's where the Democratic candidate Kamala Harris was Thursday night in Reno, Nevada, where she urged voters to turn the page on a decade of Donald Trump. She once again told supporters that Trump is increasingly unstable and obsessed with revenge. And before Nevada, Harris had also stopped over in Arizona and courting Hispanic voters who've traditionally been in an area of strength for Democrats, but Trump has been gaining ground in the nationality and religiously diverse U.S. Latino population.
I know who you are, and here's the thing about all of us. We know that when you know what you stand for, you know what to fight for. You know what to fight for. And we know we have an opportunity in this election to turn the page on a decade of Donald Trump trying to keep us divided and afraid of each other. We're done with that. We're exhausted by it. We're done with that. We're done with it. We all know he is not someone who is thinking about how to make your life better. And this is someone who is increasingly unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and he's out for unchecked power. And in less than 90 days, either he or I will be sitting in the Oval Office. And at the top of my list is bringing down your cost of living. That will be my focus every single day as president. I will give a middle-class tax cut to over 100 million Americans. Enact the first ever federal ban on corporate price gouging on groceries. I've taken on that issue before, I'll take it on again. I will make housing more affordable by building more homes and taking on corporate landlords who unfairly buy up all these properties and jack up rents.
The former President Donald Trump was also at a rally in Nevada on Thursday. He told supporters the United States is an occupied country and promised voters that November 5 would mark what he calls Liberation Day for the nation. Trump invoked the story of U.S. Marine Corps veteran Nicholas Ketz, who was recently killed in Mexico, allegedly by a Mexican cartel. His family was present at the rally, Trump inviting them on stage.
The United States is now an occupied country. Can you believe I have to say that? We're an occupied country. They're coming in, and they're by the thousands, and they have equipment that's military-grade equipment. How do they get that? They have military-grade equipment, but it will soon be an occupied country no longer. November 5th, 2024 will be Liberation Day in America. Liberation Day. Through our open border, Kamala Harris is also actively aiding and abetting the worst human traffickers, child smugglers, drug dealers, and bloodthirsty criminal networks on the planet. There's nobody worse than what she's catering to. They even have an app number where to call so they can dump off illegal migrants. They have an app. Can you believe it? They have cell phones. They have airplanes flying over the border loaded up with migrants that they're dropping all over our country. The cartel's profits have soared from relatively minor numbers to $13 billion from human trafficking alone under Border Czar. She doesn't want to be called Border Czar. She was the Border Czar, but
Interestingly, Nevada is one of the countries voting early in the United States, but early voting ends today in a few hours already. As of Thursday, nearly 900,000 voters had turned in their ballots statewide. There are close to 3,000 temporary election workers at the Clark County Election Department processing those ballots. In Clark County, however, mailed and drop box ballots are processed at the Election Department office. Workers follow a 7-step process that begins with intake, where the ballots are prepared for processing, followed by ballot extraction, inspection, and concludes with secured storage. Well, he used to be in the Democratic Party, but ran a while ago as an independent in this year's election before he abandoned his campaign to join Donald Trump in the Republican Party. I'm talking about former presidential independent candidate and part of the Kennedy dynasty, Robert F. Kennedy. There he is. RFK Jr. was joined Donald Trump in his campaign. He is also joined in Glendale, Arizona. He joined on Thursday, where he lambasted his former Democratic Party of deviating from being a party of peace, civil rights, and constitutional rights.
I smell a landslide on Tuesday. I lost a lot of friends and a lot of family. But I have a much bigger family now. The Democratic Party that I grew up with was the party of peace. It was the party of civil rights and constitutional rights, and particularly freedom of speech. It was the party that had skepticism toward the CIA and the national security state. It was the party that was also skeptical of Wall Street and the corporate domination of American democracy. It was the party of women's rights. My uncle, Ted Kennedy, wrote Title IX to make sure that women could play sports in college. And it was the party of democracy. It was the party that fought hard to make sure that every American had the right to vote for the candidate that they chose to vote for. Today's Democratic Party is the party of war. It's the party of Dick Cheney. It's the party
also make you ready for the election on Tuesday is the state of Ohio, once considered crucial to winning the presidential election. This year, however, not so much. Ohio used to be a key swing state in the presidential election for decades, winning lots of political ads and campaign stops, but the tide shifted in 2016 when it went from purple to red. 51% of the Ohio voters voted for former President Donald Trump. 53% voted Trump in 2020, but President Joe Biden won the election. Trump is expected to win Ohio, which has 17 electoral votes, for the third time in a row in 2024. In any case, poll workers are working as we see them, working through the mailed-in and early voting ballots, so which will then be scanned by machine. Details of the votes are not available until election night.
In Ohio, by law, we're allowed to extract our ballots, and we can pre-process our ballots and prepare them for tabulation on election night. So when the election's over at 7:31, the first results you see in Ohio are all the absentee mail ballot and early in-person voters that have voted before Election Day. So in this room, this is what we call our absentee ballot vault. And so we store all our ballots in this room. The workers who are in this room are Democrats and Republicans. We do things in a bipartisan manner. We have cameras in this room, and this room is secured under a DNR lock. So what that means is it takes a Democrat and a Republican to enter the room in order to access the ballots and everything in this room. Quite a bit. I think we processed about 136,000 mail ballots for this election. So far in our early voting center, we've voted well over 100,000 Franklin County voters. So it's been heavy. The turnout's been heavy so far for early voting.
Let's bring in partner at Gainful Solutions and President Emeritus Corporate Counsel on Africa, Stephen Hayes. Stephen, it's great to see you. And you have been with us since we started discussion on the U.S. presidential election. We're counting days now to the real process of electioneering for those who've already voted. Is there still much anticipation, do you think?
Well, I think there's a lot of anticipation. I'm one of the early voters myself, having voted about a month ago in the state of Maryland. I think there's a great deal of anticipation, but I think there's also a great deal of gratitude that this will soon be over. It's been, even though it's been a short election period by most standards because Kamala Harris came in late, it's been a very tiring election series, I think, on everybody. And I think we're all going to be glad that it's over, possibly over, I should say, on Wednesday morning.
Yeah, so there have been more than 50 million votes already for those who were voting early. Those ballots will be kept until election night when they'll be opened, and then they will be counted. We see a lot of voting already holding in Ohio, which used to be a swing state. I know that Ohio did determine former President Barack Obama's victory in 2008, but it's no longer considered a swing state. Why is that?
Well, I think it's gone more to a rural vote, has been very critical. I think that the rural middle class, working class has left the Democratic Party to some extent and has made it more a Republican state. But again, it used to be that Ohio was the bellwether for all the elections. As Ohio went, so did the election. That's no longer true because they went for Trump in 2020. So, but it's an important state, nevertheless, in terms of number of votes. But it's not considered any longer, at least now, a swing state. A lot of it depends on the personalities and who's voting and so forth. But Ohio's gone more conservative over the last 8 years, certainly.
Stephen, just a thought here about the electoral officers. I know that, they're state chosen, they're state elected and all of that. Do they also vote in elections?
Well, yeah, they're American citizens, so they can vote in elections like any other citizen. They become electors only, and in a way it's a name only because most states require the electors. I think all states require the electors to vote the way the state goes. So they are nominally electors. They go to Washington, I think it's on January 6th, to formalize the vote. But it's an interesting system, but they really only vote the same way as every other American votes.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that for us. Now, both candidates, we've seen some big wigs on either side. The biggest of them all on Trump's side has been tech billionaire Elon Musk, who, by the way, refused to appear in court yesterday over his $1 million giveaway to registered voters until Election Day, despite an indictment by the Pennsylvania DA. How is this not election fraud, Stephen?
Well, Musk has been very clever about that, and I think it's still debatable whether it is or is not fraud. But Pennsylvania is indicting him under running a lottery without full disclosure. What Musk has done is saying that every day if you register to vote, if you sign my petition, which is to support Trump, basically. If you sign a petition, you register to vote, we'll have somebody will win $1 million every day. And somebody in Michigan won yesterday, apparently. But the thing is that he also says it doesn't matter who you vote for. So he's not buying a vote for Trump per se. But of course, being a Trump backer, he's certainly, a very visible Trump backer, and certainly creating excitement by money giveaways. He's certainly encouraging people to vote for Trump. It's still a question whether that, in fact, is illegal. And he's not technically buying votes per se, but in fact running a lottery system. And so Pennsylvania is trying to indict him has indicted him under a lottery law. He's ignored showing up at court, which does suggest, or frankly state rather than suggest, that he feels he's above the law. But he is going to get away with this because the election's only 5 days away. And if they do have any successful indictment later, then it's after the election.
Yeah. But, he made that announcement at a Trump rally. So go figure, they will have to be Trump supporters. Let's talk about RFK Jr. He is a political protege coming from the famous Kennedy family. He is also a deviation, ran as an independent candidate earlier in the election. And then he moved on to support Trump. Not really sure if he is a member of the Republican Party as we speak. Trump has promised him America's health sector and also health agencies. Says when he becomes president, RFK will handle America's health systems. He will also handle at least 4 health agencies when Trump becomes president. How dangerous is it making these promises when you really don't know which way the election will go?
Well, making these promises is really up to the candidate. Sometimes they feel if they announce some of their cabinet members in advance, it's going to help their campaign, going to bring a certain block of voters. I think Trump feels that making that announcement on Kennedy will bring the Kennedy backers to his side. I'm not sure that's true, but it's a lot of candidates have announced who they're going to have in the cabinet in their cabinets in the past. They haven't announced the full cabinets, but they've announced specific members that are going to be members of their cabinet, sometimes not identifying which one. In Kennedy's case, what's interesting also, Trump has specifically said he will not give him the environmental cabinet position. So as the Secretary of Interior, Kennedy was a very strong environmentalist. He headed the National Resource Development Council, one of the strongest environmental groups in the nation for quite a while. And he's obviously changed a lot. I know the family fairly well. I've met Robert Kennedy on a number of occasions, but the change has been rather dramatic over the last 5 years.
Yeah, the change itself. And, he really doesn't have that many supporters, does he? Running as an independent, I haven't really seen any successful independent candidates in American politics. There's so few of them, aren't they? So if he decided to run as an independent candidate against Trump and Kamala Harris, how well do you think he would do?
I think he would have done well enough to hurt probably the Trump campaign more because of his particular viewpoints now has been gravitating more to the Trump positions, such as the anti-vaccination, the conspiracy theories, and so forth. So I think Trump, wisely, if I can use that on Trump, was smart to bring Robert F. Kennedy in. He could only do that by promising him something, and apparently that's the Secretary of Health and Welfare. So it's going to be interesting if, in fact, that happens. It's going to make for a very interesting series of positions on health. Scary to me, but we'll have to wait and see.
On the Harris side, Stephen, there are some newcomers who have endorsed the Democratic presidential candidates, Kamala Harris. We have NBA great LeBron James, and more recently, American singer Jennifer Lopez. From history, Stephen, how have celebrities really impacted on elections, especially the turnout, and how votes go?
They may have influenced the turnout. I'm not convinced they've influenced how people vote that much. However, it does say a lot for what America is now, that you would follow a celebrity as opposed to thinking more deeply about the issues. We in this nation, I think, are very celebrity conscious. Celebrity dazzled. We judge our worth by being close to famous people, and I think that's very, very unfortunate. Do they have an effect on the campaign? They have an effect on visibility. The media certainly gravitates towards celebrity as well, further reinforcing this cycle. But I think that both sides have their celebrities. I think that probably the useful part for any candidate is to at least be able to match the celebrity power of the other candidate. And essentially, Trump has a number of celebrities by supporting him, and that's particularly in the country music star and also in the big business world like Elon Musk. So it's a normal part of the process. I think it's an unfortunate process, and it does suggest a certain degree of shallowness in American society, very frankly. I just think it's sad that we aren't really addressing the issues, but are more dazzled by who supports whom.
Yeah, and I did wonder, Jennifer Lopez's endorsement coming about towards the end of Harris's campaign. I know she joined her in Las Vegas, calling on the Latino and Hispanic voters. It does seem kind of late in the game, doesn't it, if she was to make any impact at all?
Well, I'm not so sure because the Hispanic vote in Nevada is going to be very, very important. And it's one of the critical 7 states. So her coming out, and also obviously in terms of celebrity states, there's probably no bigger state fixated on celebrity than Nevada. So her coming out at this time may in fact tip the balance just enough. I don't know the draw, but the Hispanic vote now is becoming absolutely critical in Nevada. Will it help? Perhaps not.
I guess we'll have to wait and see. November 5, we'll be watching from here. Stephen, thanks for joining us. We'll be speaking to you again in the course of our program.
Thank you. It's an honor as usual. Thank you.
Well, stay with us on the program. We still have more ahead. A look at the battleground states, which will be the deciders in this year's election. Stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of the U.S. presidential elections. And just before we continue, here's a summary of the day's top headlines. In Spain, the death toll in the floods has risen to more than 200. Many of the deaths are happening in the Valencia region. There's, however, torrential rain in the region of Puebla with a red rain warning in place. People are being told to stay indoors as much as possible. In the meantime, an additional 500 military personnel have been called up to join in the cleanup operation in Valencia, and utilities companies are trying to restore power to thousands of residents. French authorities say a drug trafficking-related shooting in the western city of Poitiers escalated in a brawl on Thursday night. 5 people were seriously injured in a drive-by shooting at a restaurant in the city, including a 15-year-old boy who was left in critical condition after being shot in the head. It follows a shooting in the northwestern city of Rennes last week, which killed a 5-year-old boy. The worst is yet over with Typhoon Kongray as torrential rain and strong gale triggered by the typhoon lashed on the Chinese city of Shanghai today. All ferry services in the city have been closed. Shanghai's railway operator announced suspensions to some high-speed trains from yesterday until today in preparation for Kong-ray's impact. Typhoon Kong-ray made landfall on Thursday in Taiwan. It swept through the island, causing 2 deaths and snarling transport as the remnants of the storm brushed the Chinese coast. Here in Africa, President Mokgweetsi Masisi of Botswana has considered defeat following the country's general elections. It marks the end of the ruling Botswana Democratic Party's 58-year rule. The opposition Umbrella for Democratic Change held an overwhelming lead in the party's results, making its candidate Duma Boko the favorite to become president of a southern African country that is one of the world's biggest producers of mined diamonds. Masisi said he called Boko to inform him he was conceding defeat and said that Boko was now effectively the president-elect. We're ending in Kenya, where a new deputy president has been sworn in. Kindiki Kithure took over office today after a colorful event in the capital, Nairobi, attended by government officials and Western envoys, among other guests. A court cleared his swearing-in on Thursday after orders suspending it were lifted, despite his continuing court case challenging the impeachment of the previous deputy president, Rigathi Gachagua. Gachagua is challenging the impeachment before the High Court, arguing the charges are unsubstantiated and the hearings unfair. We're back now to our coverage of the U.S. presidential election, and Kamala Harris and Donald Trump will be campaigning in the swing state of Wisconsin today. The focus of the campaign shifting to Midwest America. More than 65 million people have already cast their vote, beating the early voter turnout record in 2020. As we move forward with the election, the second...
You're watching Nolly Magic TV. My joy is to keep you updated with the latest gist. And your joy should be subscribing to this channel and giving this video a thumbs up, please.
Look back to when it all began for both candidates, a journey to the White House.
You cannot claim to be for unity if you try to overturn a free and fair election.
Vice President Kamala Harris is looking to become the first female president of the United States. She became the front runner for the Democratic nomination after President Joe Biden bowed to pressure from within the party and dropped out of the race in July. Swiftly, she won the support of the party heavyweights and was the only candidate to qualify for the Democratic presidential ballot, which ensured the outcome of the delegate voting was never in doubt. The 60-year-old is a former U.S. Senator and California Attorney General. She is the first female, American, African-American, and Asian person to serve as vice president. She officially became the vice president on January the 20th, 2021, after being sworn in by the Supreme Court Justice. Back in 2003, Harris became San Francisco's district attorney. While serving in the role, she launched the Back on Track initiative, offering job training and other educational programs for low-level offenders. In 2010, as the first African-American and woman to be California's Attorney General, she quickly made an impact by pulling out of negotiations for a settlement from the country's 5 largest financial institutions for improper mortgage practices. Eventually, in 2012, she scored a $20 million payout, 5 times the original proposed figure for her state.
Republicans in Congress.
She is now looking to break the glass ceiling further by becoming the first woman to lead America if she prevails in the November 5 election.
Hi.
How are you?
Good to see you. How are you?
According to her White House profile, as vice president, Harris has represented the United States on over a dozen foreign trips during her term and has met with more than 150 world leaders to help strengthen global alliances. As recently as last year, many inside the White House and the Biden campaign team privately worried that Harris was a liability for the campaign. However, Democratic officials say the situation has changed significantly since then as she stepped forward on abortion rights and courted young voters. Recent polls showed that Mr. Trump had built a lead over Biden, including in battleground states, after Biden's disastrous debate performance in June. But Harris's entry to the race changed the dynamic, with recent polls showing a tight contest. Vice President Harris was born in Oakland, California on October 20th, 1964. She is married to Doug Emhoff, an entertainment and intellectual property lawyer. The two met in 2013 and were married the next year. She is stepmom to Emhoff's two grown children, Ella and Cole, who call Harris Momala. When Harris was elected vice president, her husband became the first spouse to be referred to as second gentleman, as well as the first Jewish spouse of a president or vice president.
Up to just be plain weird.
Without any political experience, Donald Trump became the 45th president of the United States, taking office in January 2016. During the primaries, he defeated more than a dozen rivals to win the Republican nomination. While he lost the popular vote, he defeated former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton by winning a majority of the Electoral College votes. His campaign slogan was, "Make America Great Again."
From this day forward.
As president, he signed a major tax reform bill into law and oversaw a reduction of federal regulations. The Trump administration also renegotiated trade agreements with several countries.
I am announcing today that the United States.
Other domestic priorities included Supreme Court and federal judiciary appointments, increased military budgets, aggressive border and immigration control, criminal justice reform, and the reduction of prescription drug prices. In foreign policy, the Trump administration moved the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a controversial issue. He also brokered normalization agreements between Israel and a number of countries.
The motion is agreed to. The Senate, sitting as a court of impeachment, stands adjourned sine die.
In 2019, the House of Representatives impeached President Trump based on allegations of obstruction of Congress and abuse of power. He became the first U.S. president impeached in the country's history. The Senate acquitted Trump on both articles of impeachment.
Today, our nation has achieved a medical miracle.
In 2021, the Trump administration was consumed with the coronavirus pandemic. The U.S. recorded its first case on January 20, 2020. Critics argue that Trump's response to the pandemic was delayed and did not sufficiently encourage public health practices to reduce the spread of the virus. Trump himself was infected with the virus but recovered soon after.
But vote now.
Trump lost re-election to Democratic candidate Joe Biden in 2020, but publicly claimed widespread voter fraud had affected the outcome. Supporters of the Trump campaign traveled to Washington, D.C. for a Save America rally on January 6, 2021.
Now it is up to Congress to confront this.
Trump addressed large crowds on the ellipse near the White House and encouraged attendees to protest the counting of Electoral College votes in Congress. The rally turned violent when the president's supporters overwhelmed law enforcement, breaching the United States Capitol and disrupting the vote count. 5 people died as a result of the violence, and the Capitol complex suffered millions of dollars in damage. On January 13, 2021, Trump's actions resulted in the House of Representatives approving another article of impeachment, the incitement of insurrection. Now he's up against U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, looking to be the 47th President of the United States. Donald Trump was born in Queens, New York, on June 14, 1946. In 2005, he married Melania Noss. They have one son, Barron. Donald Trump also has 4 adult children from previous marriages: Donald Jr., Ivanka, Eric,
and Tiffany.
Let's bring in our Washington correspondent, Maria Bird. Maria is in Washington, out and about, I see. So the campaigns must be fever pitch by now. This being the last week ahead of November 5. The candidates, however, did not stop campaigning until Election Day. Am I right?
You are correct. All the way until Election Day, they will be campaigning. And now we know that there are some states that they will be heavily focusing on between Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Wisconsin. Some of those states that they feel that the lines are too tight at this time and that it potentially could be one that could go either way. And so those battleground states are going to be those that they focus on over the next few days and this weekend. And they're actually still even taking campaign contributions all the way up until the last moment because this election is one that is historic in nature and one that many are watching. And November 5th will definitely be a day that will give the world an idea as to the direction of the United States.
And we'll all be looking at it from here. Now, looking at the political backgrounds of both candidates, Maria, you could say that Harris does have the upper hand. She started off as a state prosecutor before entering into Congress. Trump, on the other hand, went straight for the White House, becoming president. Harris ran a lackluster campaign for president before she was picked by Joe Biden to be his vice presidential candidate. And then Trump ran for president and won the first time against former President Barack Obama. They both have political experience, no doubt. But do you think they've gleaned from that in the campaigns?
Yes, they both have political experience, as you stated. Obviously, this has been a career for the vice president. She has been career one that has been working within the political landscape. And so this was the next progression. As we know, in the United States, typically you go from vice president to president. That is the typical trajectory. We know that the former president came from the business industry. But he has been a former president and obviously has surrounded himself with those Republicans that have been long-time career politicians. So this will be a very interesting race. Two very different candidates, polar opposite ends of the spectrum as far as the direction for the United States. And this is going to be one that I think will set the tone for America moving forward, especially as America still grapples with economic challenges and challenges around where it stands, whether it's Roe versus Wade, the reproduction rights, or other very critical issues around infrastructure. So interesting.
And being in the nation's capital, Maria, I'm sure you have been, taking the pulse of the people, trying to find out exactly how people will be voting on Tuesday. What do Washingtonians think of the upcoming polls?
Well, Washingtonians obviously are very much vested in the political landscape. Many of the jobs in Washington are around the federal government, appointees to the White House, and so they're very vested. But we also know that Washington, D.C. is not a state, and so their vote does matter, but it's less of an impact as some of the other states. And so they're going out to exercise their right to vote, and they're just hoping and watching, and obviously very active. Many of them come from other states across the country, active in their home states, and also being very much a part of the advocacy work from both sides, the Democratic and the Republican parties.
Now, both candidates are campaigning in Wisconsin today. How important is this state to the election? Is it a battleground?
It is a battleground state, and we know those electoral votes are extremely important, and every vote in the Electoral College counts for the candidates. And so we've seen it before where you can get the popular vote and not get the Electoral College, and that can cost you the election. So this is one, Wisconsin, they really do believe that if they get individuals out, depending on where you sit, if you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you get those individuals out to vote, that it could swing either way. So you will see Wisconsin being a very key focal point. And even as the candidates are coming forth in those battleground states, you will see those who are their right hand right there in those battleground states as well. So we will definitely begin to see Nevada will be another area you'll see them campaigning in over the weekend. And you'll also see Arizona. And North Carolina has become a battleground state. We know that it typically went red, but there are signs that potentially the data is showing it could go blue. So this is a contentious weekend for many states, and many states will be actively campaigning for their candidate.
So I don't see much activity in Ohio, but I remember in 2008, during President Barack Obama's campaigns, Ohio was one of the states, considered one of the battleground states back in the day, and it did play an important role in deciding who won the election. So how will the elections go in Ohio?
Well, Ohio is still a very important state. It's not necessarily right now a battleground. There are several electoral votes in Ohio, which is why it is very important. So there's obviously been a lot of efforts in Ohio. And there's also Pennsylvania, another state that we've seen previously that we've heard much about, but not as much as we had in previous years. But this year it looks to be Georgia, North Carolina, Wisconsin. There's been a lot of effort in Wisconsin over the past few weeks.
So we're seeing charisma and we're also seeing character. What are Americans voting for on November 5?
What you're hearing, to be quite honest, is character. I think that Americans realize the need for morality across the board, wherever you sit, whether or not you believe that we have done the right thing around Roe versus Wade, or whether or not you believe that women should have additional rights that have in some ways been suppressed as a result of Republicans in various states. And so that is, I think, where we're seeing most of the voters are coming in, is the moral factors, what they believe in, what they believe is important, and how they want the country to be governed in the future.
Maria, thanks again for speaking with us. Our correspondent Maria Bird will be out and about up until Election Day and even after, taking the pulse of the people. Thanks again, Maria, for bringing us up to speed and for this all-important election. When we come back after the break, though, we'll be looking at a Met Orchestra violinist who's given free performances on Voter Day, Tuesday, November 5. Stay with us. As Americans are counting down to November 5, which will decide the next president of the country, curiosity is growing. You can tell, even here in Nigeria and around the world, citizens invested in who becomes the next leader of the free world. The U.S. consulate here in Lagos organized an event at the University of Lagos to address these thoughts and questions surrounding the process by which Americans elect their leader.
By end of day November 5, 2024, Americans would have decided on a new president via the democratic process of elections. But the American system of democracy may be confusing to some, as whoever wins the election must secure not just the popular vote, but that of the Electoral College. Understanding the American electoral system is the purpose of this election event, themed Democracy in Action, Understanding the U.S. Election Process, at the University of Lagos, with university management, students, U.S. consulate officials, and the media present. Deputy Vice Chancellor of the University, Professor Bola Obo, emphasizes the importance of the conversation.
Understanding the electoral process is very crucial in order for us to foster democratic engagement. The democratic values upheld in the United States, such as the freedom of speech, the rule of law, and the protection of individual rights, serve as a model for us all as we strive to enhance our democratic practices here in Nigeria.
Following their opening statements on strengthened democratic processes, U.S. Consulate Political and Economic Chief Michael Irvin advocated why democracy remains the best system of governance.
I can think of no more important issue in our bilateral relationship with Nigeria to talk about with you today than democracy. That hard-fought value and commitment to selecting our leaders openly and transparently as part of a broader process of accountable governance, which is what brings us together today, accountable governance. It sounds so simple, but it has been the most difficult to achieve, to spread, and to sustain around the globe. And nobody has cornered the market on what it means, on how to get there, or how to stay there.
Other issues such as the political parties, absentee diaspora voting were discussed, including the role of young people in the electoral process.
I'm saying things are changing. I think young people are becoming more and more conscious, but it could be better. With social media now, and the stage it is, and the fact that they are also feeling the pinch of government policies.
They're very politically minded.
So they are likely, the next elections, nobody is going to tell a blind man that war is coming. He will feel it, he will hear it himself. So the youths are likely to become much more interested. But as I agree with you that we need to tell them to be more interested in politics, not to be indifferent or apathetic to what happens in the political space, because it has to do with their future.
By the end of the program, there were nearly 50 follow-up questions from the audience, which were summarized by the panelists. Amarachi Ubani, Channels Television News.
Well, we're back in the studio now. Let's bring in Ibrahim Anoba, a PhD candidate of History and African American Studies at the University of California, from where he joins us. Ibrahim, thank you for joining us on the program today. As a historian yourself, the presidential election has intrigued people around the world for years. What is it about America's elections that makes it a case study on the workings of democracy?
Thank you for having me, Amarachi. Such a pleasure to be with you. So America's democracy have intrigued people for decades. And this, I think, significantly go back to 1947 when President Harry Truman announced what is now today known as the Truman Doctrine, which pretty much says that America is committed to defending democracies anywhere across the world with any means possible. And since 1947, as we know, America through the CIA have infiltrated many countries to stabilize so-called democracies and also to topple government that were seen as to be leaning towards communism. And we had a fair share of that in Africa. So it's been going on for decades, and also during the latter stages of the Cold War. But today, it's even more important because what happens during the US election determines, one, what's going to happen between Russia and Ukraine. And more importantly, what's going to happen between Israel and Palestine. So it has some very international policies, international relations dimension. And that's why one of the many reasons why we care.
That's true, because the rest of the world kind of takes its cue from America's leader. So do you find any similarities in the candidates with Nigerian politicians?
See, that's an interesting question, because then you have to be very honest. So there are similarities and there are differences, right? The similarities are that we've seen some quite interesting rhetoric coming out from both the Democratic and Republican candidates. A couple of days ago, there was this massive rally, I think you're showing right now, that held in New York, in Madison Square Garden, where this comedian came after Trump and pretty much said people in Puerto Rico are living in a floating garbage, which is so violent and so sad to say about American citizens living in Puerto Rico. But also, we've seen someone like Joe Biden just a few days ago call Trump supporters garbage too. I mean, people have called Trump Hitler. I've called him all these sort of names that almost got him assassinated in Pennsylvania. So we go back to Nigeria, and we cannot but help to identify certain rhetorics that pretty much caused some inter-tribal or inter-ethnic violence in places like Lagos during the last election, where you think voting for a particular candidate means you are voting for your ethnicity. Voting for, the APC means you are anti-Yoruba, so to say. So we've seen that rhetoric play out in both spaces. But the difference is, however, is that as much as the American candidates are ready to debate, ready to be in town halls and face the electorate, face tough questions, we haven't seen that come up in Nigeria as recent as we can remember, where politicians have refused to come out to debate or face questions from the public. So there are quite similar factors here, but also in many ways different.
And we're looking at the nature of the political campaigns now In the US, it's issue-based, but there's also been a lot of name-calling, as you rightly pointed out, especially on the Republican side with Donald Trump. I mean, he's called his Democratic opponents fascist. He's called her all sorts of names. What is the psychology, though, do you think, behind name-calling and, or the mudslinging in electioneering, especially as we near the election day itself?
See, Amarachi, name calling has always been there in American politics. You just have to go back to the Nixon era in the late 60s and early 70s, where Richard Nixon was calling people different names. But we haven't seen that become so crazy until Trump came on in 2016. But the consequence of that on the U.S. landscape is that it has created this deep cultural and racial division. And America has never been more divided than we are right now. And you look at the consequence of that, you see people in a certain category or demographic thinking it's their job. It's almost existential for them to vote a candidate. For example, among what we call non-college white voters, meaning people wouldn't go to college or university but are white, they even think it's their job. It's their ordained, God-ordained right to vote for Trump, because then it represents some of their views. And people think that immigrants are always going to vote for the Democrats and whatnot. But we've seen that change recently. But the American political landscape is so narrow at this point. 7 states will determine this election. 7 states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and across the 7 states. Right now, Trump is narrowly leading in 5 states, and Kamala Harris just in 2, Wisconsin and Michigan. But again, these are always going to change because, as we know, people have already voted, and many are still going to vote, and they're going to vote based on these cultural divided lines and racial divided lines. And it's just so sad to see that American politics will be determined by factors like that.
So very quickly, immigration will play a top, will be a factor in this election. And I know that Trump has said some things about immigrants. How do you feel about that, when you hear that you've been in the United States, an immigrant yourself?
So that's the main problem with Trump. It's quite a few number of people actually love his economic policy. I mean, Trump's economy was great. Biden's economy was really terrible. At some point, we had about 9% inflation rate. I mean, it has come down to about 2.4% right now. But the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of immigrants will look at someone like Trump and see a person who represents anti-immigrant value, who doesn't see Black people as equal to other races in the US. I mean, it's called Africans, some names. He recently said Asians, people from Haiti, are eating cats and dogs, which was absolutely unfounded. So while many MAGA Republicans are willing to vote for Trump regardless of whatever he says, a lot of the votes that Trump actually needs to get beyond the line from immigrants, from people from Middle East background or Latino background, are kind of not where he hoped they will be. Most owing to his own past words that are not so palatable.
Yeah, you're being a politician but not saying exactly how this impacts on you, but I forgive you. Thank you so much, Ibrahim, for speaking with us on the program.
Thank you, Amarachi. It's nice to have you.
And this will be what you'll be hearing if you're anywhere near where violinist Sarah von Sattel, an opera orchestra violinist, will be playing on Election Day. That will be New York, however. So instead of her usual gig at the Met, she'll be playing at polling stations in the city. She's one of the thousands of volunteers who are part of the Play for the Vote, a non-profit which places local musicians at polling stations across the country. And that'll be all for now. Join us again Monday. I'm Amarachi Ubani.
Thank you for having stayed to the end of this video. You made me really happy. One more thing, click on the notification bell so anytime I